good.
Don't look so worried.
Oh, this will be fun. This will be fun. This is not a test.
Make believe he's sitting there in his birthday suit.
We will start with a few kind of background questions
Okay, all right,
for you.
okay.
Okay, Dave, I'm rolling, so whenever you want to go ahead and...
We're ready. My name is David Ulbrich, and this is September 6th, 2007. And what is your full name, sir?
Arthur Melvin Leadingham,
And when and where were you born?
Joliet, Illinois, 1919.
And which squadron of the 376th were you in?
I was in the 512th.
Before you entered the military, can you tell me a little bit about what it was like living in the United States during the Great Depression and the early years of the war?
Well, we naturally we were part of the Great Depression, and right out of high school, I decided that due to the fact that we had a fairly large family, that I joined the
Civilian Conservation Corps.
the 3 C's. I went out for 6 months, Oregon, and then when I came back, my brother Glenn and I went to Ohio University, and I was there for 2 years, and then I was drafted into the service in 1941.
All right.
And
where were you when Pearl Harbor was bombed? What was your first reaction when Pearl Harbor was bombed? Can you recall?
Where was
Or
I?
what was your first reaction?
I think I was still in school at that. Let's see. I really can't remember just where I was, but I knew that once Pearl Harbor was bombed, we were going to be at war, and this is when I made the decision that I left school, and shortly after that, I was drafted into the service, and I went to Shepherd Field, Texas. That was my first. After I joined, they sent me to Shepherd Field, Texas, and I started my career in the Air Force at that point in time.
Did you have a choice about what branch of the armed services you entered? Did you score high? How did you get into the U.S. Army Air
Yes,
Force?
I told them I would like to join the Air Force, and that's the reason they sent me. I was drafted in Louisville, Kentucky. I mean, I was from Ohio, but that's where I was drafted, and I told them I wanted to. I would like to go into the Air Force, and they shipped me directly to Shepherd Field, Texas. That was a training camp of airplane mechanics. So that's where I started my career.
And then, so you were being trained to be an airplane mechanic.
Well, I was, yeah, right. I could have been an airplane mechanic, or I could, but then from there, I went into training for crewmen. They sent me to crew training for, I didn't know whether it was going to be 24s or what, but I went to a B-24 orientation school in San Diego. And from there, I started my training around, and finally I joined with the rest of my crew, and we shipped overseas after we trained for several months, you know. We trained all over the United States, just about, you know, different places. And they sent us to, and we picked up a brand new B-24. I think it was in Topeka, Kansas, and we picked this new aircraft up, and we were to fly it to North Africa. And there was our first experience that was a bad experience was when we went to the South American route and flew to South America, across Ascension Island to the Gold Coast of Africa. But about halfway across the Atlantic, we almost lost the aircraft. We decided we had a Bombay tanks full of gas, you know, and they thought, the pilot and the co-pilot thought we should transfer some gas. So it's my job to take care of that, you know, and I switched this is all mechanical switching, you know, on those things for switching from one tank to another, or from the Bombay tank to transfer fuel. And I had no more than started to transfer, and all 4 engines started quivering. And they headed the thing down, trying to maintain speed. And I knew something was terribly wrong. I called and told the co-pilot, I said, put the booster pumps on. And I switched them back as fast as I could. But we were flying about 15,000 feet or something like that. And by the time we pulled out, we were probably about 1,000 feet from the water.
Wow.
But we finally pulled out. They told me that all 4 engines, it was an airlock developed in some, and this was a common problem with the B-24s when you're transferring gas. Some kind of an airlock that interfered with the, but we finally pulled it out and regained altitude and continued on.
So in terms of the shifting or the working the valves and so
Yeah,
on,
right.
that was one of your jobs.
That
your
was one of
tasks
my
as
jobs.
flight
Yeah, that
engineer.
was one of my jobs to do that. You know, that was the flight engineer. That was part of his responsibility.
During not that there were any regular missions, but during our normal missions, where did you stand or where did you sit?
I usually stood right behind the pilots, or any. My job, I didn't have a gun position. I could have taken a gun position if necessary, but my job was to help to do whatever mechanical problems turned up that I could fix, or anything that, and to help if a gun got stuck or something like that, to help get it going again, you know.
So did your initial training in Texas as a mechanic, or as a mechanic, did that come in handy in terms of giving you more knowledge about how the airplane worked?
Oh, yes, oh, yes. Yeah, we had a very thorough, and then after that, I was sent to B-24 orientation, you know, and we got pretty thorough education there on B-24s.
In terms of evaluating damage or making repairs, were there some common things that seemed to go wrong, malfunctions or damage that you had to do frequently, or what was typical? What were some of the typical problems on a mission or damage that you might have to repair?
Well, yeah, whatever could be fixed in flight, yes, but you know, on the ground, I did not have any responsibility as a flying flight engineer. I didn't have any responsibility for ground maintenance. That was all taken care of with the ground crews, you know, that maintained our aircraft.
Did you fill out any sort of logbook or let the grounds crew know what
Oh,
might
yeah.
have been going
Well,
wrong?
yes, we would have a log that explained our problems. You know, if we had a guns malfunction or any other, if we had to feather an engine or something like that, you know, they'd know about it. You know.
I've seen movies and I've read in books, and I've talked with other veterans.
Yeah.
Flying at what, maybe 20 or 25,000 feet, you were in the flight suit, the heated flight suit,
Right. Yeah, we had a heated flight suit
and the gloves, and
you'd have to, if I had to move around, say go to the back end, I'd have to unplug it, you know, and find another place to plug it in wherever I had to go, you know, to do whatever I had to do. But normally, it wasn't too often that I had to leave the flight deck, really, to do any of that extra work.
from a mechanical perspective, and was the B-24 a good airplane mechanically?
A very good airplane. Mechanically, it performed very, very well. And our ground crews were, if we had an engine that needed to be replaced, they would replace an engine while it was on the ground, and we pretty much kept the same plane all the time, except if the last one, we lost it.
Right. Well, we'll
Fact
get to
is, we lost two of them. We had on a low-level mission to Palestia oil fields. We landed in Turkey and left an airplane there, and then later on, we got shot down on our last mission. We lost another aircraft there. Of course, after that, we didn't do any more flying after we got shot down there.
I would love to know more about the Ploeshti mission. I realize that may be hard to remember, that may be some tough things to recall and so on, but can you walk me through that mission? And,
Ploeshti?
Yeah, the low-level mission.
Yeah. We trained in the desert. We had a mock-up of pretty much of what was going to take place there, and we trained in the desert in North Africa before that mission, and then as we took off, it was quite a large group, including two groups, you know. Fact is, I think there was three groups came down from England to join us, and they trained there in the desert for a while before, and altogether there was about five groups made that trip. It was quite a large group of B-24s.
Would you say there were several hundred aircraft?
I don't think it wouldn't be it might be in the couple of hundred, you
All right.
know. We had about maybe 25 or 30 per group. That was about the normal number of airplanes in a group. So it probably was 150 making that mission. And it was one aircraft was lost almost a little bit after takeoff. We were just up dropped into the ocean, into the Mediterranean, about halfway up the coast of Italy. And that was the first one we lost. But the rest of them but we lost quite a few over target. I mean, we dropped our bombs, hopefully on the target. I don't know, it's hard to say. But we're flying at low level and had to climb up a little bit to drop the bombs. You don't want to explode them. They had, I think they had time to lay fuses so that we wouldn't bomb ourselves, you know. But we dropped our bombs, and then we headed for Turkey. We were pretty badly shot up. There was a lot of fighters. We were supposed to have a fighter escort, but we never saw them. And but we saw a lot of other enemy fighters. They were just flying. I don't know where they collected all these fighters, but we encountered quite a few. We had a running battle with maybe 3 or 4 fighters just attacking our own aircraft. We counted about 200 holes in our aircraft when we landed in Turkey.
It seems like it would have been, as you were flying in at low level, what would have been about, you know, in terms of the flight itself, 200, 300, 400 feet, and then you would have climbed slightly higher to drop the bombs?
Yeah, we traveled at low level before we got there. Then we climbed to a bombing altitude before we dropped the bombs. Yeah.
And then it seems like after you dropped the bombs, it must have been pretty much every man for himself. Maybe you tried to stay in formation, but the
that's
chaos
right.
and the smoke and the fighters.
We didn't want to, get into part of the explosions that would take place, and there was smokestacks and everything else there. You know, we had to fly at fairly high altitude there. Not a high altitude, but it was probably 5,000 feet or something like that. Dropper bombs, and there was about 6 or 7 ships flew into Turkey and landed. You know, a lot of them went back to Cyprus and landed in Cyprus. You know, so there wasn't too many that got back to home base. There was a few of them got back to home base.
How long a flight was that? Do you remember roughly, or how?
I would say it was something like a 12-hour flight, something in that neighborhood, altogether. Yeah.
And during you said you had your ship had had running battles with several fighters off and on. Were you moving around the aircraft at that point, fixing things, helping to reload, and so on? Do you recall?
Well, yes, whatever I got a call to do something, but I was, a lot of times I was standing behind the pilot and co-pilot, that was where I was stationed for the most part of the time. Unless there was a problem, I had to get up and go, then I would leave but we all had to have, if we were at altitude, we had to be able to be somewhere where we'd be connected to oxygen, you couldn't survive very long if you were at altitude. You had to be if you're at 10,000 feet, you could survive there, but if you go a little bit higher, you have a hard time breathing for any length of time in high altitude.
Another question for you that's something that I think is really important to think about. It's said, the old adage goes, there are no atheists in foxholes. To what degree did your experience in the military and in combat and the B-24 affect your religious faith? Did it strengthen it? Did it make a difference?
Yes, I was a believer. I believed in whatever happened to me was God. My God had something to do with it, and I know that I was the only one that was able to get back to home base. And 4 of my friends in the back end of the plane didn't make it out, and the rest of them were all taken prisoner. And I know that what I believe in, that I was helped in that matter. I was a believer.
That's important. That's important for everyone to know. I had read your piece on your adventures when you had to bail out. And that's quite a story. Can you tell me some more about the experience of, evading the Germans and, traveling across the countryside?
Well, the thing about it, when I landed, a young lad picked me up on his bicycle and took me to his house, and he grabbed the parachute and wrapped it up and hid it, or took it with him, and we went up into the hills for a couple of days or so, and up around his relatives up in the hills, and they probably were looking. The Germans knew how many airplanes went down and how many people were on those airplanes, and so they knew how many people was involved there, and so that's the way I was able to escape. Even probably some of the Italians might even turn you in if they had an opportunity, And then when I got back down, when we came back, the young lad, I had a piece of shrapnel in my leg, in my calf of my leg. It's a piece of shrapnel about the size of your little finger. tip of your finger there, and it got sore. So the young lad took me to the home of a nurse, registered nurse, and she treated it, and we removed the piece of shrapnel, and in the meantime, I had given the young lad my watch, and I don't know, some other things I had given him, you know, and there seemed to be between he and the nurse, they had a little bit of an argument about that, and so he threatened. She said he threatened to turn me over for the ransom, and so she decided it's time to get out of here. So made plans to catch a train to Fiume. That's the southern tip of near of Italy, you know, and that's the way I escaped across the border into Yugoslavia. And that's part of my story, you know. And I walked this was evening, toward evening, and I walked a few until about dusk down that main highway going south. It was a deserted highway. It was a major highway in Yugoslavia. I decided about dusk I'll have to try to make contact with somebody here. So there was a little community up in the hills there I saw, and I started up the hill. There was an old man in a long white beard coming down the hill, and I said, well, I'll take a chance. So I told him who I was. I said, Americana. And he said, he didn't say a word. He just turned around and motioned, follow me. And he took me to a home. They fed me and put me to bed. And when I woke up about 3 hours later, there was a guy standing there with a gun in my face, you know. He was a high officer in the underground army, you know. And
So
he was
a Yugoslav partisan?
huh?
Was he a Yugoslav partisan?
He was a partisan. He was a partisan, part of the partisan army. But he wanted to make sure that I was who I said I was, you know. And he questioned me. He had been to America. He could speak perfect English. He quizzed me for about a half hour, trying to see if he could trip me up in something. But
So what kind of questions did he ask you?
all kinds of questions about America, you know, and so forth.
So capitals of states.
Yeah,
and
and I don't know. I can't remember all the stuff that he asked me. You know, it was. But he finally decided I was who I said I was, and he assigned a runner, a guy. They could do nothing but walk. They had no transportation, so we started. He assigned a guy to take me down to the headquarters group down about halfway down in Yugoslavia, and there they had an English group there, had a radio in that, and they radioed back to my home base. They got information back to home base that they had me, you know. But it took me another I think, I don't know forget now how long it took. But it took me another month before I could get home, get back to home base. That's,
Then when you finally got back to the Americans, to the American base, got back to your unit, you were basically sent home thereafter.
yeah, I had 45 combat missions, and I think the goal was 50, but they figured
Chasing around for 3 months was
that trip back from walking, they figured I spent enough time, that was enough to finish out my 5 missions that I didn't make.
Sure.
So as soon as they could get orders cut and ready, well, they shipped me home.
And about what year was that? About what time was that in the year?
That was December the 28th, 1943. What was the date, Johnny?
Well, no, it was 43,
She's
late
probably-
43, late 1943. Just gives
Yeah,
us a ballpark estimate. Is fine.
yeah, it was, well, it was probably in about March or April of 43 that they sent me home, somewhere around there,
Oh.
As soon as I got back to home base, they said, "We're going to send you home. You've had enough."
No arguments there. Right? And
I was the only one. The rest, all of my crew and all the other guys were taken prisoner. I was the only one who got back.
when you got back to the United States, did you stay in the military to train other people, or did you separate from the military altogether?
I was discharged pretty quick after I got back. Yeah, they figured about a year. I stayed in about a year, but I didn't do any more training, or I didn't. I would go with a crew maybe and check them out. I did do some flying there for a while. Westover Field, Massachusetts.
Just have about 3 more questions for you.
Mhm.
Looking back on being in the American base, the air base there, and overseas, what did you do for recreation when you weren't flying? What did you do for fun? Or what's the funniest episode that you can recall? Funnest or most funny episode, or
Gee, I don't know.
maybe a story about one of your buddies, one of your flight crew.
Well, yeah, that we had a little guy who was Whitey Whitesides he was really a real character. He was a top turret man. And when they had to make that jump, he jumped down out of the top turret. He could see everything that was going on. He could see airplanes failing and so forth, and he could see the shape of our aircraft, better than I could, because we were into it. We lost 2 engines on the one side, and we're kind of going into a spin. He jumped down, said, "Let's get out of here." It was even before even the pilot or anybody else said anything. We knew that we were going down. I mean, and he got down, he opened up the bomb bay doors, and he looked down, jumped back up and says, "You go first." So I went first. And I never saw another American until I got back to home base.
The nurse that helped you make your way across the countryside, did you ever get her name or meet her again, or?
No, I got, we got a letter from her, didn't we? We got letters from her, and we tried to make contact with her. The fact is, we were even over there, and evidently something happened to her. We don't even know what happened. I think it was our plan to try to, make contact with her. But we was never able to do it. We traveled over there, especially for that. Well, not for that purpose alone, but that was one of the things we wanted to do.
Sure, sure. Your it just brought to mind your escape pack. You had an escape pack. What was in that little escape packet? Or do you recall? You had, because apparently you had some money and you had a map.
Yeah, I had money in it. Fact is, I gave it to her. I gave her all the money I had and all because she bought tickets on the train. I gave her all the money I had in the escape kit because I couldn't use any money. There was no place to spend it. I wouldn't. So I think I had about $80 of my own money. I mean, I had American dollars. Whatever else was in the escape kit, it was various currencies, some Italian lira, and I gave it all to her. And she bought tickets, and she would buy the tickets, but we would never identify with each other. She would stick them in a crevice somewhere, and I would grab it. And we never. I wouldn't want to endanger her life, so that's the reason we just stayed apart on that trip.
All right. 2 more questions, sir. Yeah. This is a question I ask all the veterans, whether they were sailors or airmen or soldiers or Marines.
Yeah.
Do you consider yourself to be a hero because of your service? Why or why not?
I don't think I can. I never consider myself a hero. I was just doing what I had to do, just I felt that my service to the country was what I was due. But being a citizen of the United States was a privilege. So I was willing to do whatever I could for my country. And it was, and I enjoyed as much as you can enjoy something like that. I enjoyed being a part of the crew, and we were like brothers, and they're all gone now except me. Not one of them. Jim Collison was our last pilot. He died a few years ago, pancreatic cancer. But we had a good relationship once we met after the war. It was by accident that we met. It was we joined this group in Fort Worth, Texas, wasn't it, Uni? Fort Worth, Texas. They had a big convention there of all the people who built the B-24, all the people who flew in it, and all the people who had anything to do with it. It was it was quite a large group of people, and we accidentally run into my pilot and his wife there, and we had because I didn't know what happened to him after the war. You know, we didn't make contact with each other, but that we had a good relationship ever since then. They had a place in Texas. We went down there a couple of times, and they come to our home in Indiana a few times, you know. So it was a good relationship we had with them.
Is there, we're coming down to the last several minutes. Is there anything you would like to add or anything you'd like to say? This is, I've been grilling you pretty good here, and you've done an outstanding job. Is there anything you'd like to add?
I say this, I've enjoyed the meetings that we've had with this group over the years. You know, every year it's a privilege to be able to still be healthy enough to make this trip, to enjoy the friendships that we've made, and I'm just I wish some of my crew members could have experienced this same thing, you know, but I hope we can continue to have these meetings each year. I know we're getting fewer and fewer of us. I understand there's only about 88 of them here this year. I don't know if there's any.
Well, thank you very much, sir.
Okay.
I very much appreciate
All right.
your time.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.